All right, so we can go ahead and kick off so we don't waste anyone's time. But welcome everyone. We are so excited for the next installment of our FAFP webinar series. So this afternoon, we are really grateful for everyone joining. We have to thank all of our members and sponsors for our ongoing support of FAFP. And we wanted to highlight our sponsors here and just give a special appreciation that this has been a great opportunity for us to give free webinars thanks to all of these sponsorships. So thank you. So a quick housekeeping. So we just would like to ask everyone to keep your video and audio turned off, please, during the duration of the program. So it'll just make the connectivity a little bit better. We are recording this and we'll make sure that we have this loaded up onto our website where all the past webinars have been placed. So you'll be able to review it after this is over too. And we would please ask, generally we save questions for the end, but Roger's been really kind and said that we can do questions throughout, so we'll be a little bit more interactive today. So you can either type questions directly into the chat box, you can raise your hand using some of the features at the bottom where it pops up and you can do a hand raise, we'll be able to call you out. Or if you just want to unmute yourself and politely ask your question, that would be great. So I would like to go ahead and just introduce Roger. So our speaker today is Dr. Roger Cook. Dr. Roger Cook is the Principal Advisor, Strategic Science and Risk Assessment for New Zealand Food Safety and is the first international president of the International Association for Food Protection. He is also the Principal Food Microbiologist, a position he has held since 1995. Roger works closely with overseas regulatory authorities and science providers, represents New Zealand on Codex Food Hygiene and on the joint Australia-New Zealand Ministerial Forum on Food Regulation, and is a member of the joint FAO, WHO expert meetings on microbiological risk assessment, working group on STECs in foods, and is a member of the International Commission of Microbiological Specifications for Foods. So we're so pleased to have you here today, Roger. I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Jamie, and thanks everybody for inviting me to speak. I'd really have actually liked to be there in person, and if we think about it, I suppose this is the worst thing that's happened with COVID for us here in New Zealand anyway, is that we haven't been able to travel overseas. Kiwis are flightless birds, but that's normally airplanes have allowed us to get over that. But right now we are absolutely flightless. Until we're vaccinated, we won't be leaving the shores of New Zealand for the US, and that means I won't be at Phoenix. It's strange being the president of IFP for a year and not being out of the country, not being to all the various meetings that we would go to, and not even being in Pittsburgh last year to get inaugurated, and I won't be in Phoenix this year to hand over the gavel to the next incoming president, oh gosh, what's the handle? Thank you, Ruth. Sorry about that. So I think I'll be getting the wooden spoon this year, which is a laugh, I suppose. We have to look at the humour in it. Now, look, as Jamie said, I'm quite happy for anybody to just butt in with questions. Sometimes there will be things that are said and you think, I don't understand that, or I want to sort of ask a couple of questions about that, and it will lose the context if we wait till the end. So feel free to butt in. Hopefully I'll see your hand up and I can and respond. But if you need to, just start talking and I'll be quiet. So thanks for the introduction. Yes, I am the principal microbiologist as such. And in terms of SARS COVID virus, I never thought that it would actually be a food, so it would keep me so occupied, and it certainly has over the last year kept me phenomenally occupied. And actually most of that has not so much been fighting the effects of the virus, but fighting the effects of I suppose the collective power of the uninformed epidemiological media commentators and social media trolls that have really kept on stirring up COVID as a food safety problem. When as we'll go through the talk today, we'll realise that it isn't really a food safety. Yes, it is a food security and continuity issue, but I'm not aware that it's a food safety issue. So anyway, we will go through that, and if any of you have a contrary view, again, just pile on in. This is to be interactive, and I like a good discussion. So look, one of the things, I'm not going to give you the IAFP spiel, because the Florida Association are probably more into the association than anybody else, and I look forward every year to the president's farewell, so to speak. So tough guys, you're not going to be able to make me dress up in something this year. I was a little bit nervous about that, but I think more than any other affiliate, you guys understand what IFP is all about. So we won't go into that. Just to say, perhaps, that what IFP has done for me anyway is that it's enabled the farthest most affiliate, which is the New Zealand Association for Food Protection, to actually feel like a real close family. And as Jamie read out the various organisations and things that I represent New Zealand on around the world, I'm lucky enough that I get to actually see a lot of the people that I've interacted with through IFP on those. And at the moment, Michelle's on ICMSF with me, and Jeff Farber previously was on ICMSF, and also on what we call a strategic food safety dialogue, which is a regulatory group, and so the IFP family as such, the community is so well represented, and it makes those international barriers so non-existent actually. So today we've got perhaps two of the most farthest affiliates, and we're able to just talk at what is a reasonable hour. And I thank Jamie for that, and Jason for that, for organising for 8 a.m. New Zealand time. Unfortunately, there was a 5:30 webinar before that, so I've been up for all hours anyway. But so anyway, before I get into the food safety side, there is somebody that I'd really like to recognise out of Florida, and that's and I met him at my first IFP. In fact, it was IMFIS in Orlando in 1997, and that was Pete Hibbard. He came up, and we had a really nice chat about things food safety, and made me feel so comfortable. But then we suddenly discovered that we're both sailors, and so every year I've gone back to the conference, and I haven't missed one. I've been back. I specifically look for Pete so we can share our sailing adventures. He's a cruiser, and I'm more of a racer. But it's I've always wanted to come to Florida to actually go out for a sail with Pete. So that hasn't happened yet. It won't happen this year, but hopefully in the future that'll happen. So just to thank, if he's online, to thank Pete for being a friendly face for IFP for me, and it's tremendous. So let's get into the topic at hand, which is global food safety and the COVID-19 era. Now, we all know it's been an unprecedented challenge, and there's no denying that for the public health side of things for all of us, especially for you guys. I'm just going to show you I'm going to screen share a graph, and this is the only screen share I'm going to do. The rest of this is going to be me just prattling on, but I'll show you this if I can. Come on. There we go. This is a graph. Really, it's just the number of COVID cases per day for New Zealand since March last year, right through to actually just a couple of weeks ago, and I haven't updated it, but it doesn't differ. The most important thing here is here is our main community-based COVID illnesses, and there's less than 2,000 there. This was between March, starting here, 12th of March or thereabouts, and the 24th of April last year. It actually stretched out a couple more cases out to the 22nd of May. But as you can see, a very, very short, sharp COVID community within New Zealand COVID spread. And 99% of these were New Zealanders coming back from overseas. You know, when everything hit the fan, we said, okay, the borders are shut, and except we can't stop New Zealanders returning to New Zealand, and back they came in droves, and that's what we're seeing here with this big peak, with New Zealanders coming back, and that obviously tailed off. We went immediately into 4 levels of lockdown. So if I start here, alert level 4, which was put in place through legislation, and which involved total and complete lockdown except for essential businesses, and food businesses most food businesses were part of that. Everybody had to stay at home. Public transport was all shut down. The airlines were all shut down, everything else. And you may have heard our Prime Minister speak, Jacinda Ardern. It has been reported worldwide, but the team of 5,000 absolutely shut down and stayed at home and didn't complain about it. Alert level 3. So the alert level 4 is when it's rampant in the community. Alert level 3 is when it's in the community still, but well controlled and dropping. Alert level 2 is when there might be the odd case in the community, but they're well controlled. But essentially, it's life as normal. And alert level 1, which is there isn't any community spread in New Zealand, but it's still rampant overseas in certain places, and that's still the case today. So we are today in alert level 1. You'll notice there's different colors here, but I'm just going to shift the graph up a little bit, and so you can see that our first wave basically finished in May last year. That's good, and we haven't really had any real community spread since there. All of these peaks along here, along the bottom, this is in our managed isolation and quarantine facilities. So if you like, I would call this is on the outside of our border. This is every human case coming back to New Zealand, and 99% of these are returning New Zealand citizens or New Zealand residents. And so you can see we're getting hit every day. We're getting hit with 2 or 3 cases coming back, and they have to stay in quarantine facilities and hotels that are extremely secure, and they have to stay there for 2 weeks or until they're symptom-free and test negative before they're allowed through the fence and officially into the border. So you can see that's been continuing, and it still continues today if we go out. If we go to see what's actually happening in the community, this was our last outbreak. You see, this is August 2020, last year, and this was around a cold store where some cases turned up in a cold store. There didn't seem to be a link to the border, and before we found out about it, these people had infected the 4 people had infected their families, and also their church and a couple of other places. But our Ministry of Health and our Public Health Service were able to shut it down relatively quickly. Since then, you'll see there's just these little blips, and these little blips are security worker at managed isolation, cleaner at managed isolation, a couple of people at managed isolation that had come out and then developed symptoms, and they never turned into full wide blown community infections. So for all intents and purposes, what we are saying is that our system is such that we don't have community spread in the community, and we haven't had since this date here, which is 12th of March this year. We haven't had any cases that are not in managed isolation, so we've essentially got it controlled. Now, I'm not going to gloat about that, but it certainly shows what a small population of 5 million people, one border stuck in the middle of the South Pacific Ocean can do, and it has tainted or biased what we've had to do and what our considerations are, and you'll see how that's actually been a positive. It's been a positive in terms of our illnesses, but it's been a positive also in terms of trade and some of the science that we're seeing, and I'll discuss that now. So I'll just stop sharing again if I can work out how to do that. Come on back. Where Where are we? Come on. Stop share. There we go. There, right. Okay, so that's what New Zealand looks like. That's completely different to Florida, completely different to the US and many other countries. So let's now consider it from a food safety perspective. One of the questions I was asked on the webinar that we had just prior to this was, did we ever think that it would be a food safety issue when COVID-19 first turned up? And the answer to that from most people was no. But as a food trader and a major food trader around the world in terms of our gross domestic product, we've seen small things that shouldn't be food safety issues become food safety issues from a perspective of regulatory pressure, and so we were very concerned, and I'm probably going to annoy people around the FAO, WHO, and I'm not intending to do it from a nastiness perspective, but it certainly shows you the picture we were in. The FAO, WHO published fairly much immediately into the COVID pandemic their food safety guidance for food businesses, and that's turned out to be a bit of a problem for us from an international trade perspective. So you will have heard in all of the FoodNet webinars and various other things that there's no definitive evidence that COVID, the SARS-CoV virus, can be transmitted on food or packaging. That's what I'm saying, and that's, I think, what most people are saying now. That's not to say that we can't detect the viral nucleic acid on food packaging and even on food, and you would expect that in countries where the virus is rampant, where people are still preparing food and managing food even though they are shedding virus. You would expect to see virus, but it might be on the outside of shrink wrap and cold stores, etc. So there's no reason to believe that wouldn't occur. But interestingly, and we had that one outbreak that I showed you there in the cold store, and we detected COVID virus on the outside of a locker door handle, on the tally sheets, the bits of paper that the guys are working with. But these are places that the 4 infected workers actually touched, and they were all on the same shift, on the same night shift in that facility. So it was very limited, and we detected the viral DNA on that. We never detected viral DNA anywhere else in that factory or on any other food products, packaging, on containers, nothing. It was all limited to the things that those guys touched, and so that gave us some confidence that yes, they were shedding it onto surfaces, but because there weren't any other cases within that facility, that actually it wasn't a major food safety or a food packaging issue. So that gave us some confidence. And we know from that there are other viruses that are spread around. It's just not COVID, SARS-2, SARS-1, and influenza, and norovirus, and other adenoviruses and things that we're not seeing those being picked up off packaging either. So we had some confidence it wasn't a food safety problem. We all see the publications out there. Yes, it can survive on stainless steel, and it will survive on plastic and cardboard, and it will remain active under laboratory conditions, supposedly representing those in cold stores. Our argument is that we don't think they actually do represent the conditions in cold stores. Cold stores are quite dynamic. Laboratory conditions can't actually replicate that dynamic nature, and we know the viral activity really drops off quite quickly, and certainly faster than transportation times in global markets. So yes, we say there's a possibility. We know we'll be able to detect the viral nucleic acid, but we don't believe that those publications out there actually support that infectious virus is able to cause illness. We have seen some papers where that they claim that the virus will actually survive on food. But actually, when we've looked at the papers, some of the papers, what they've done is they've added pieces of food to a fantastic suspension of virus and claim that it survives. What we've shown is that small amounts of meat dropped into a viral suspension don't actually kill off the virus, and that's completely different. This work's been in non-peer-reviewed papers, pre-publication papers, and those papers have never appeared in the peer review literature, and we can understand. So we're very careful to keep an eye on this work that's I think being over-interpreted or wrongly interpreted. So if we look at China, they've done some excellent epidemiological work and some complex modeling of people flows around marketplaces, especially in Beijing and around the Wuhan markets, and they've identified hotspots where they thought that supported food as the source in the Beijing market, and when we looked at the modelling and we looked at what they'd done, there were some confounding possibilities that these papers had actually ignored, and again they haven't been peer reviewed, and we think they would have been rejected because there were flows that could very well have resulted from person to person, not from food sources. So. And if we look at the literature, there's not one case that's been reported to date that's had a definitive link to the consumption of food or contact with contaminated packaging. Now, that's probably because so many countries overseas have still got it rampant in the community, and you can't see the trees for the wood or wood for the trees, however that cliche goes, and that while you've got it rampant in the community, you would not be able to see the let's say 10% of cases that might have been transmitted via food or via packaging. But we come back to our graph before about New Zealand. We don't have the community transmission. We import a heck of a lot of food from overseas. We have a lot of packaging coming over. Most of it, the food is chilled. If it's food that's spoiled and raw food, and then it comes over chilled, and some of it comes over frozen. And we would have expected to see in that period from May last year through to now, we would expect to see small outbreaks that would have popped up that didn't have a link to the border. And so far, every single case that we've had in those small number of individual or two-person cases that you saw carrying on until early March this year, all of those were in MIQ border people, not out in the community from food that's been imported. So every day that goes on and we don't see cases attributed to food, we get more and more confident that that's not the case. And I'd like to say that I think our like-minded regulators overseas, we have quite a strong group that meet. We were meeting weekly during the first year. Now we meet when needed, but it include USDA, FSIS, should I say the FSIS, FDA, Canadian food authorities, EU food authorities, including the UK and Scotland, and Australia. And we've all come to the same conclusion, and we worked very, 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 very closely with ICMSF. I'm on ICMSF, as Jamie pointed out, but we worked closely with them to come up with the ICMSF opinion, which was then and still is that in terms of a food safety issue, that COVID's not a food safety issue. So I suppose I would have to say at this point, and sorry, Pete Benenberg and our other friends from FAA, WHO, we think that the interim guidance was simply wrong. We actually told them that way back on the 7th of June last year, and we're still and I know they're looking at the guidance now, but it's probably of no use, because everybody out there, the countries and individual manufacturers, have actually put their procedures in place, and so full guidance, contemporary guidance with perhaps the real story about food safety as opposed to food continuity. It's probably too late to update it, but and I think the work that came out of China, which really did, for us, and I think for most people, concluded that actually food and international trade is not a food safety risk. It's not a risk. We're really talking about the what they call the farmed wild animals in Southeast Asia, and those were likely to have been the source, and at least into the Wuhan area, into that market, and then person to person took over after that. And it's quite interesting when you look at some of the history around those foods. When African swine fever went through China a few years ago, their government asked their farmers to cull millions and millions of pigs. And when you take away what is a staple diet for them, you need to replace it with something else. And these wild animals were suddenly starting to be farmed more in Southeast Australia and Asia, sorry, and filled this gap in the food supply. And so that's a reasonable hypothesis for how this virus got into the food supply. Do we blame China for it? No, we shouldn't blame China for it. It could have happened to any of us that ended up in a situation. It's just they happen to be the center of it, and so we should all just work with them to make sure it's got out of the food supply, and that we can end this pandemic. So I'll come back to it and say that yep, definitely not a food supply and international trade, food supply issue, or a food safety issue in international trade. Is it actually a food safety issue though? And the answer is, well, no, it's not from a trade perspective, but it could be. Now, if we talk about the food continuity side, most of the work that all of us have done is to stop the virus getting into our food businesses. And why is that? We've done that so that our workers are safe. And that's good. All the science we've done has said, let's get this physical distancing in place, so if it does get into our food businesses, it won't spread. We'll put in physical barriers. If they can't be 2 meters apart, then we need to make sure that they've got masks on. There's good physical dividers between. They're wearing visors. We should have all of our hygiene, process hygiene and personal hygiene at the top level anyway. For those of us that export, we need to make sure we get one, our food is safe, obviously, but we also need to make sure it gets the longest shelf life possible, and that means that our microbiological food safety programs and our cleaning programs need to be exemplary. For those of us that are producing ready-to-eat foods, we should already have the top of the line listeria control programs, and those listeria control programs are far in advance of what you would need to actually control SARS-CoV-2. So all we were doing was really enhancing what we should have already had in place. And the science has sort of suggested there are areas that we needed to improve in around ventilation and airflows, and understanding that cold environments, people yell at each, or cold noisy environments, people physically exerting. There are droplets in cold environments. They're shouting at each other to be heard, not in anger, but just as part of their process. And that cold temperatures and things promote virus survival. So we've learnt those and those particular things from science, and we've managed to put in place mitigation factors. So one of the issues I see in terms of food safety is if COVID does get into your plants, but it's only just 1 or 2 workers or in small groups, what happens is that if you keep processing, you may not have a full complement of staff, or your staff may be slightly off, not working as efficiently as they should be. And then you may start getting a breakdown in your food safety program. So, you know, the person that was supposed to measure this and measure that on a daily or an hourly basis or whatever is missing on that day and doesn't do it. And something sneaks through the system, and we could get outbreaks from that, or human illnesses from that. We haven't seen that here in New Zealand, and I can't speak for you guys, but it's certainly, I'd be prepared to say that probably food continuity would break down, and we will have some food safety issues around that, indirect food safety issues due to COVID. But again, as I say, we haven't done that. I don't think I need to go through all the guidance that we put out. That was most of my work for the first couple of months while I was on lockdown, was developing the guidance around what people should, or what companies should be doing. Obviously, we wanted the Ministry of Health were keeping COVID out of the country as best they can, and the managed isolation facilities have stopped that. So that's our sort of our primary mitigation strategy. The second part of the strategy is stopping the virus, if it did get through the borders, getting into our plants. So we had obviously health checks, we had temperature monitoring, people that actually knew others that have been overseas or recently come from MIQ, they were asked to stay away. And the team of 5 million people certainly were quite happy to do that. All the physical distancing on the outside that people had to do, they were all happy to do that. We didn't see the riots and the social disturbance as such. We were happy to stay away for the short time, and then of course once they got inside the premises, all of that normal hand washing, physical distancing, PPE, dividers, and separating businesses up into bubbles of people such that the bubbles didn't actually interact, certainly gave us a good assurance that if COVID ever did break through the border, that we would be able to control it. So we were happy that we had this elimination strategy for New Zealand, had this completely shut down. Yes, as I say, again, incomplete science and misinformed opinion has driven inappropriate perceptions. We've managed to control that a little bit in New Zealand, but we struggled in terms of global trade. And I'd like to say at the end of the story, but this is not picking on China. And please, if anybody from China is listening, please don't take it this way. They had some issues which looked like they were food and packaging driven in China, and they did what they needed to do to put in place quickly to give themselves more assurances. The first thing they said was, look, we're going to follow everything that the FAO WHO interim guidance says you need to do. And we went, oh no, now we've got a problem because we think the guidance is wrong, so China's going to be wrong. And lo and behold, they certainly did raise the issue of needing worker testing, and some of this came down into not necessarily government requirements, but port authority requirements, in which case it became importer requirements. So we got word from China that their importers were likely going to require testing of workers. And we looked at it and went, well, why the heck do we have to test workers? We don't have COVID. And if we haven't got COVID, what sort of test would you use to pick up asymptomatic people? And we don't see random outbreaks, so we don't think we've got asymptomatic people. What sort of sampling plan would you use to pick up COVID in your workers? And interestingly, can we actually do that because of the Bill of Rights? And that is still a discussion we're having today. We got when they were going to ask for testing product and packaging. But again, why would we do that if we don't have SARS virus? They were going to ask for disinfection of packaging, and that raises a whole lot of issues around what happens to the packaging when you disinfect it. Do you then start getting disinfectants that are appearing on food products? And there are lots of international rules around that. And why would you do it if there aren't SARS virus? And they were requiring these cleaning programs to be implemented. And as we said, we already do that for Listeria, and why would you do that for a product that's intended to be cooked? So, and this was to be at all levels. Recall I said that there are levels 4 down to 1. This was for all levels. So really, it was these suggested controls were one size fits all. There wasn't a risk proportional control. There wasn't allowance for escalation. If you're at level 1, you don't really have to do this. But if you're at level 4, then you should be doing it. And so really, so what we did is we've put a rather large submission to China saying, actually, guys, how about allowing this to be risk-based? How about allowing an escalating response? How about allowing region-based regulations? And we could show that all of those cases that I showed you before that were escapees, if you like, from managed isolation, they were all in Auckland in New Zealand, which is top half, one big city. The rest of New Zealand hadn't had cases of COVID since May last year. So let's say a seafood manufacturer that's processing in Bluff, where I come from, which is right down the bottom end of New Zealand, and there's Cook Strait, that's no relation, but Cook Strait between the two main islands of New Zealand. Why can't we allow some regional based regulations and requirements and allow them to export to China, and maybe put regulations where COVID is rampant? So the good news is that I suppose the importers from China and the ports have really settled back on the rumblings they were making. We haven't heard from the authorities, but that's okay. And we're seeing what we believe is that the risk-based arguments that were put from the US, from EU, from ourselves, and saying, hey guys, we're not saying it's not a possibility, but it's mainly just the RNA. Probably not infectious virus, and there isn't any evidence to support it. We, as I say, we haven't had formal recognition that that's the case, but everything seems to have backed up, and international trade has settled down a bit, at least for us. I can't speak for the USDA and FDA and what and imports of foods into the US or exports to China, but certainly for us, it's settled down. So look, I think what I'll do is I'll end it there, and we can. If there are things that you want to ask questions, let's go for it. I'm hoping that vaccination will open up international travel a lot more than it is. I'm not going to be vaccinated until just before Christmas. We don't really need vaccination here, so therefore we're not fighting to get the vaccines from countries that do need vaccination. We're 100% Pfizer. All of our border workers have been vaccinated, and my wife, who works in the health system, has been vaccinated. But I won't qualify until probably around Christmas time. So I may see you all in Pittsburgh next year. I'm looking forward to that. I do want to get back to Florida, because I need to go out on Pete's yacht and cruise around the Florida coast. yeah, there's a whole lot of things I'd love to do in the US. I'd really like to get to an IndyCar race, and because Scott Dixon and Scott McLaughlin, both Kiwis, are doing rather well at the moment. We're proud of them. I'd like to get to see some women's golf. Lydia Ko's doing great, and I want to see the US come back and try and wrestle that America's Cup back off us again. Sorry guys, you missed out this time, but yeah, hopefully shortly. We'll all be able to travel again. So what I'll do now is I'll open it up to questions, and let's go for it.
Well, we look forward to hosting you, hopefully soon.
Good.
So yeah, if anybody wants to come off mute, feel free to ask a question, or if you are more comfortable just typing it in the chat, you can do that and we'll read them out. I will kick it off. I was curious if you've seen a decline in any other foodborne illnesses, just with the increased hygiene and sanitation.
Absolutely, Jamie. Now, look, I'm not going to say that just because of the increased hygiene and sanitation. Look, right across the board in terms of human health in New Zealand, the notification rates obviously went down, and I know Australia's seen exactly the same. Our notification of Campylobacteriosis and Salmonellosis and influenza just plummeted. They're coming back up again as everybody's obviously come out of the various bits of lockdown, and so we don't know why that is. It may be due to the sanitation, and it certainly would have a lot that when you're in lockdown, people would actually just sit there and go, okay, well, I've had my dose of gastro. I should go to the doctor, but I'll just sort of hold on for another day or so, and it's gone. And so 3 days later, instead of going to the doctor, it's disappeared off naturally, and so that never gets notified. What we've seen in some illnesses, that the hospitalization rates for those illnesses didn't go down. So what that told us, that if it was serious enough, people would still go to the doctor or go to the emergency department, and it would end up in the notification system and we've got a really good national notification system. So we know that what we think all that happened was that the iceberg of notifications actually sunk a little bit. So we just saw the tip, but underneath that iceberg was probably still the same. I'd like to think that maybe a little bit was around increased sanitation. I'd like to think that people actually, that maybe those that reckon that they get their illnesses when they go out and eat at a restaurant, as opposed to getting it at home where they have their sloppy cooking techniques. There may have been a little bit of that, but I'm not sure. We've got some pretty good regulatory controls and regulatory systems around food service, and we don't see outbreaks actually linked to restaurants and things like that very often at all.
That's really interesting.
I suspect that the US would see exactly the same in those groups that are locked away, that you just hang on for a couple more days instead of going to the doctor. And we certainly are seeing illnesses that were in the very young and the very old. They were getting reported. So those would be in that at-risk yoppie group that we would expect to have greater symptoms, or the morbidity would be stronger than the healthy individuals, generally healthy individuals, sort of between infants and the frail elderly.
Thank you. Anybody else next?
Can I ask a question of everybody else? So if anybody sort of got an indication about how things went in their companies or in the industry that they deal with, around workers turning up and how it spread through the premises. Did anybody see it spread through the premises, or was it spreading in the community and the workers actually all came to work at the same time? Can anybody ask that for me? Or answer that for me?
can say in our grocery industry, we saw a lot more coming from the community. At work, people were adhering really well to the masks and keeping distance for the most part. But when you would see clusters, people had either been hanging out outside of work together, or it was coming
Yeah.
from families a lot.
Yeah. And looking at the only information we could get about other countries is really coming through on our television service. And of course we'd see a lot from CNN, and we'd see a lot from Al Jazeera and BBC World, and you look and you go, oh my gosh, why are all those people outside without masks? And then a couple of days later you'd hear that the rate had gone up. And even now looking at India, with the religious ceremonies and the huge groups of people that are getting together, and you watch how that how the virus just goes through like instantaneously. One of the interesting things is that one of the questions that's been about mutations within the virus, and the first being the UK variant, and where there were comments made that it was more transmissible and potentially more virulent, and people still talk about that, and we're sort of looking from here, and we've had the UK virus turn up at the border, and a couple of the escapees, as we call them, from managed isolation, they've met with other people, and the variant doesn't seem to have suddenly gone bang. It hasn't exploded outwards, and so we sit and we wonder, well, is it that this mutation, this variant, is more transmissible, or did it coincide with the people in the countries where there have been a second wave due to it, or an outbreak due to it, or other variants? Is it because they became agitated and refused to stay in lockdown anymore, or they become complacent, and perhaps the governments became complacent and didn't crack down on people meeting in public? And I don't know whether has anybody got any thoughts on that. I don't think they are more transmissible, but it's just a coincidence. But I'd be interested to hear if anybody's got any thoughts on that. No? Oh well, that's something for you guys to discuss, and to keep an eye out and see if watch the literature and any science around that. The interesting thing is that ICMSF are watching all of this information very, very closely, and if there is anything that we see that needs to change our guidance and our conclusions, we will change it instantaneously. So to date, we haven't seen anything. We're certainly waiting for. There's a lot of research. There's a huge amount of research being done in the US, and I suppose some of that will be starting to come online fairly shortly, and that will be interesting to see what it tells us.
Yeah, that is interesting. I hadn't even considered that before.
What are you seeing in terms of vaccination? People in Florida happily getting vaccinated? Or we had something on our media the other day, I suppose a week and a half ago, that said that the US, the rates of vaccination were fantastic initially, but all of a sudden it's just crashed. It suddenly stopped, and the numbers of people getting vaccinated is tailed right off, and they're worried. I know the health authorities in the US were worried that the level of vaccination won't get to the level where herd immunity and vaccination are sufficient to stop it circulating, stop the virus circulating. So is Florida like that, or is everybody queuing up? I know there's a lot of older people come down to Florida, and I would hope that they would be vaccinated because they're an at-risk population. But anybody got some thoughts on that?
Just my personal experience that I had my vaccines back in April, And the first one, it was absolutely packed, and it took about an hour to get through at a huge line. By the time I got my second one, it took 10 minutes. So I don't know if that was fewer people getting it and more had already just thought they were just getting their second dose when I was getting my first or not. But the last I checked, I thought we were a little over half vaccinated in Florida.
Hey, Roger, if I can chime in on your question there. I was fortunate enough to do a little work with my employer, Public Supermarkets. I got to answer some calls on our vaccine hotline, which was, to me, it's been a career highlight of 30 years in public health and food safety, helping people get these vaccines. And as you mentioned, a lot of them were elderly, but we are in Florida. Yes, there are a lot of people from out of state that are coming here, but they are able to get the vaccine here. They did issue at first, the state government issued an order where they are reserving the vaccines for Florida residents, but it was very easy to prove resident. So if you, even let's say you live in Canada, but own a summer rental home down here or something, all you had to do was show that you own that. You could bring a utility bill or something. So it was very easy to get the documentation to be able to go and get your, the vaccine. That being said, and I don't know what the current pattern is, but you're definitely right. At first, it was just, as fast as we could give them away, and we had to have appointments. And now we have shifted to, you can walk in to most any of our stores and get the vaccine now.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Look, I hope that everybody will slowly but surely get over this being scared of vaccines. Those public campaigns that are out there that are frightening what people are saying, and they're happening here as well. That I hope people will look and go, actually, this is not right, and we will get vaccinated for the sake of the whole country. We know we won't get 100%. Obviously, some people can't be vaccinated for medical reasons. There's a whole group of people that won't for cultural reasons, whether that's cultural, religious, but hopefully we can at least get sufficient done, and we won't know, as I say, until Christmas time, whether we've achieved it or not. And certainly I don't feel comfortable to travel until even I'm supposed to be going to Australia in a couple of weeks, and but I'll be very, very careful there. We've got a bubble-free travel arrangement now. We've had it for 3 or 4 weeks, and so people are starting to move freely between the two. But of course, there's little clusters turning up in Adelaide and Melbourne and Sydney and Perth. Then you go, oh, hold on, maybe they haven't got 100% in control, but they are just little 1 or 2, 3 people clusters that are normally associated, again, as I say, to some sort of border contact with a traveller that's come back, and I think we'll be able to travel safely. But again, the food supply is absolutely safe in that. There aren't any problems with food safety, and certainly if it's only 1 or 2 people, then our food continuity is maintained, which is the most important thing.
I just had one more question. If we hadn't been kind of diverted with COVID, what do you think we would be working on now? What do you think is the most important next steps?
Oh, that's a horrible question. I don't know how to answer it. Look, I might be a little bit biased here. Back when I lived in North America for 5 years. I was 2 years in Toronto in the mid '80s, and then 3 years I lived in Detroit, and I was actually working in medical research at that stage in sexually transmitted diseases. So it's sort of meat microbiology, but it's slightly different. But when I came back to New Zealand, which was in the beginning of 1990. then a couple of years after that, a little bug called E. coli 0157 popped up. And it popped up in the US, and of course that led us right through to, in I suppose 97, the mega rig, and all the controls that were put in place for around the meat industry and various and the poultry industry, etc., for the pathogenic E. coli and for salmonella, and there were issues around that. There were GMP problems, and it wasn't. I wouldn't call it a HACCP problem. It was that the GHP wasn't even right, and not only that, people were changing to eating foods that they perhaps shouldn't eat raw, that were always designed or intended to be eaten cooked. Since then, so we've worked now since 1995, if you like, right through to now. So what's that, 25 years. I haven't really seen, and I have to say here, and I'm going to probably get told off, I haven't seen the US really get their handle around the salmonella side in their flocks, in their transmission from animal herds or flocks through into waterways or into RTE type salads and into or through the whole food chain, and you're still seeing these big outbreaks. And I look and say there's something still not right about the risk basis of the industry controls and the regulatory controls. I'm not saying they're no better than they were back then. They're a lot better, but there's something still missing in the middle of that. And I don't know what it is, but it's certainly I have long chats with Emilio, Esteban, and the guys from FDA, and trying to find what it is we can do that, or what it is that the world can do, because it's not just the US, can do to actually better get coordination between all parts of the food chain. So yes, industry might be able to process better, but if they're being fed raw materials from somewhere that hasn't got their water supplies sorted out or their farm management sorted out, then we're not going to actually beat this. And so that integration of food safety right from outside of the traditional food safety areas, such as provision of water or let's say the National Park Service, if you like, who have got national parks that have got wild animals that are releasing waste into waterways that then come down and end up as irrigation water or processing water. So if there are breaks in that chain all the way through, or should I say instabilities in that chain, then we'll continue having food safety issues. And so I think over the last 5 years, when I've been able to be part of round tables at IFP, I've always come back and said, we need to look out of our own little area, and we need to look wider and see if we can get integrated controls out into those areas. So that's the bit that I think is really important. We don't need to look at salmonella as a hazard. We don't need to look at these bugs, any other individual hazards. We need to look at the integrated control of them.
Thank you for sharing that. We have our work cut out for us.
Yeah, and to be fair, we got a small country, we can do it better. You've got a big country. In fact, you've got 50. In a way, you've got 51 separate countries. You've got all the states, plus you've got the federals. I'll call it 52 because the USDA and FDA. You've got 52 separate governments, all that need to be integrated in that. and they're not. I'm a fan for USDA and FDA to join together, at least the obviously the food sides to join together. I know that some say, well, it'll never ever happen, and I can say, well, the first thing you do is you just keep everybody as USDA food, FDA food, but you change their business cards and you call it what should we call it, the National Food Service or something or other, and then slowly, as you work through the next 20 years, you integrate small groups here and small groups there. When individuals retire, you replace them into different groups, their functions, and over 20 years, you might end up with the National Food Service. You don't need to change everybody overnight. You can just do it by operation. So yeah, I get told not to stir things up and don't mention that ever again, but I can do that and then get on a plane and fly back to New Zealand and feel that I've had that wooden spoon out and stirred a little bit more.
Well, that's good perspective. Well, we are at time. Thank you so much. This was really interesting, very insightful. I'm going to just share one more last slide here that we have an upcoming webinar next month. Oops, hopefully everybody can see that. Hold on, there we go. So our next speaker will be on allergens, the journey of sesame from petition to the FASTER Act. And you can sign up for this on our FAFP.net website. So please join. And thank you so much, Dr. Cook. This was really great today.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks, everybody. And hopefully I will see you personally in Pittsburgh next year.
That sounds great. All right, everyone, have a great day.
Bye.